Happy Thursday, everybody.
Hey.
Yay, almost there. Thank you everybody for joining the webinar and coming to hang out with Kurt and I. Just a quick recap of the topic. I think Kurt and I were chatting and we've been working with agencies and other professional services for a long time. And it feels like leaders in the space often feel like they have to choose between driving an operationally efficient and profitable company and providing a great employee experience. They feel like it's one or the other. And I think what we're here to break down today is really that those go hand in hand. And part of delivering an awesome employee experience is having a really good operational engine for your business.
Yep.
Quickish intros from your host today. I don't know what Kurt's got planned for his, but my name is Bret Swain and I lead the solutions consulting team here at Parallax. I'm a bit of an agency services operations nerd. You might ask, like, how does a normal human man become an operations nerd? And let me tell you, it goes way back. I think when most kids wanted to and say, what do you want to be when you grow up? They'd say like an astronaut or the president of the United States. I said I wanted to be a consultant. And so I ended up getting my first real gig in consulting, working for a Salesforce implementation partner. I think there I didn't know it at the time, but I was realizing the benefits of working for a consulting company that was run really efficiently. And then after that, I stumbled into my first, like what we call like a PSA software company. And that's where I started consulting with agencies and other services organizations to help them dial in their operations. I worked for a company called Cantata and I worked in customer success there. And what I would do is they'd send me into agencies and other organizations that were having challenges, and I'd do some consulting to understand what's going on and then put them on a path to get them back on track. Was there for about 3 years. And now at Parallax, I'm doing the same thing, except instead of working with existing customers, I'm working with prospects. So I think, Kurt, we're going to be talking the talk for a little bit here, but I
Yep.
think it's also important for the audience to know that you've actually walked the walk in a variety of different agencies.
Yeah, that's one way to put it. Yeah. Dragged my body over the coals. I've walked the walk. I've done all the things. Yeah. I've been working in services for over 25 years. I started my first agency in my 20s. I then got integrated it into another small agency, helped that agency grow to about 30 people. Then I joined the Nerdery when it was around 50 people and helped grow that to over 550 some people, almost 600 individuals, and helped open up offices across the country. And then started at my other agency with a couple of partners that was called Foundry, and we grew that to about 50 people. And then we exited that last year. And now I spend my days coaching and consulting other agencies. So I work with a number of different agencies as a coach, where I coach them on best practices for either lead generation, marketing, and sales processes, or on delivery practices. So how to get more profit out of the engine that you're running. And then I also do consulting as well. So I do some fractional work where I come in and maybe take on a role or take on some special projects to help in either that lead gen side of things or in the delivery and operations side of things. And I work with agencies of all sizes all over the world, and I'm really enjoying it. And I'm super excited to be partnering with Parallax. I'm a big fan of the tool. We use the tool at Foundry. It was really key in helping us really understand what our teams were doing and how our profit was doing. It made our P&L sheets a lot easier to forecast. I'm just excited to be here and partnering with Parallax on these types of webinars. Yeah, the Schmidt Consulting. That's what I do.
Awesome. Thanks, Kurt. And I think one thing that I think will be really awesome for the audience to hear is I think the way you explained it to me when we first met is that you didn't learn this stuff because you're so good at
No.
running an agency. It's because you have the hook hand,
Yes.
the
Yes.
wooden leg to
Yeah.
prove that you've been in the trenches, so to speak.
Yeah, no, I realized I was never meant for the Navy. I was always going to be a pirate. And being an agency owner can feel like a pirate captain on the high seas sometimes, because you're searching for opportunity. You're always trying to find a better telescope, better eyeglass to be able to see further away. And there's the ups can be really high and the downs can be really low. And that's where having the right tools and the right data can even out those things. You can't ever get rid of them. It's always going to be a bit of a wave as an owner and an operator. But with the right data and the right team, it's such fun work to do.
Totally. Okay. So I think we're about to jump in. I know that we'd mentioned this in the chat, but this is meant to be an engaging session. Kurt and I are going to be hitting on a number of topics and working through the content, but please ask questions as you have them throughout the next 45 minutes. And then we're also planning to leave about 10 to 15 minutes towards the end here for some Q&A if you do want to wait to the end as well. All right, so in terms of what we're going to cover, it's essentially a three-part series. So the highlight here is the services growth flywheel and like what a business really looks like when it's operating well and the benefits that has to the people in the business. But I think another interesting way to look at it is like, what's the opposite of that? Like, how do you know if maybe you're not in that growth flywheel? And are you feeling symptoms of what we'd call like the services spiral of death, which I know sounds really dramatic. And it can be, right? Like I think for
I feel like it.
Yeah, like Kurt, like it can feel pretty dramatic. But then the last part of this is going to be, all right, so now that I have a sense, now that I've seen some symptoms of both of these different, I guess you could say, processes, how do I get into the growth flywheel? How do I create that environment that's going to be great for my business and great for my people?
Mm-hmm.
All right, so this is the services growth flywheel. I know it's bright and it's happy and it's got some great colors. And basically the way that this is oriented, and we'll go into each of the elements later, is you have these business drivers in the middle. And so these are different business metrics that are really important for typical services organizations and other like growth oriented components to a business. And then along the outside, you're able to see that for organizations in this growth flywheel, they're feeling a lot of the positive impacts of being in an organization that's growing at a fast pace. And so we're gonna dive into this one in a little bit more detail later. But first, we're gonna start in the oh so ominous services spiral of death. And so here we're looking at some of those same elements, right? Where we have the business drivers in the middle, which naturally aren't painting a great picture of where that business is at any given time. And then we have some of the negative impacts that the people are feeling in that business as a result of that business not necessarily growing at the pace that it wants to or can, or operating as efficiently as it can. And so we're going to break down, the way that we're going to go through this is break down the different elements of this flywheel. And so if you look at this, I think like the takeaway here is it can be really tough for stagnant businesses to operate efficiently. I think they're dealing with compressed margins, right? As time goes on, naturally your people are going to be paid more, and that's going to impact like the margins that you're able to make on your projects unless you're also able to charge more to your customers, right? And then as your projects or as your prices increase for your team members, it can make it tougher to win work, and that can have a negative impact on your utilization rates because you don't necessarily have the work to support your people. And then you're not able to necessarily grow revenue at the pace that you'd like to as well. And maybe, Kurt, is there anything that stands out to you in this?
Yeah, as mentioned, a lot of these things can have a domino effect, right? And that's why I like the concept of the wheel, because all these things are somewhat interconnected, because that's stagnant revenue can really start to affect the others, but also compressed margins can really start to affect the others. So it is a balancing game. And as an agency owner, understanding and finding that balance is really difficult on your own, because you can't see, especially once you've got employees and you've got maybe a dozen projects or maybe 100 projects running, whatever the case may be, you can't have your eyes on everything. And finding where this stuff is happening is really important to stay on top of.
Totally. All right. So now that we have a sense of the business drivers, and just to give, if you haven't heard the term, especially these two on the left are pretty self-explanatory. For those that haven't heard about like margins or utilization rates, like margins naturally is a metric to calculate how profitable your business is. And then utilization rates is a metric that's used to calculate and measure, like out of all the billable time that you have for your team, how much of that is being spent on billable work. And those are typically two metrics that are really important for services businesses and agencies and other similar organizations. All right, so now that we have a feel of maybe what the business mechanics of an organization that's maybe feeling some of these elements of being stagnant, not necessarily growing at the pace that they'd like to. Now we can look at maybe what some of the people might be feeling in the business. And this isn't going to be true for every business, but these are just some of the symptoms that Kurt and I see pretty consistently with these organizations that are struggling with operations and struggling to grow. And so two of these, which naturally can hit the business pretty hard too, are employee turnover and reactive culture. I think, again, Kurt, like you've walked to the walk.
Yeah.
And you've been in an organization while it struggled, and then also when it did really well. How did these maybe manifest at times that weren't as progressive as you would have liked them to be?
Yeah, I would say the funny thing is that many agency owners, at least at some point in their tenure, you feel that you can keep some of the bad and negative stuff happening in the business from the employees. And the people really follow the owner and founders or partners cues, the moods that they bring to meetings, the amount. One week they're singing lots of praise in Slack, and the next week they're disappeared. And so that people pay attention a lot more than you think when it comes to what's going on with the business. So even though you might be thinking as a business owner, these are my problems, these are things that I'm dealing with in order to do this, that stuff gets out really quickly and can really affect other people, because the way that the business is maybe inside of a weird place can turn people off and make them turn over and want to leave because they're not as engaged anymore, because you're not engaging with them as much anymore, or we're not bringing in as much work. And so the clients aren't as engaged anymore. So there's a lot of trickle down here that happens when these things impact you as an owner, and then how you respond to them.
Some additional people impacts. We have unpredictable workloads and maintaining the status quo. I think when I see unpredictable workloads, this is one that can be pretty gnarly, right? Yeah. I don't know that there's this saying, what do you prefer? Do you prefer work-life balance or like work-life harmony? Either way, though, like having expectations around how much work you're going to, like how much work you're going to have in a given week or a given month, like probably a really important piece of maintaining that harmony. And I think this is one of the challenges that I see a ton with the businesses that I consult with. And there's one specific one, like I've definitely worked with others that have been on this so-called death spiral, but there's one that comes to mind specifically. And it was, I'm not going to name them by name, but they were an agency based out of Virginia, and they were about 30 people. And I'd worked really closely with their COO, let's call her Monica, to evaluate if Parallax was a good fit for their business. We built a business case. Like I genuinely felt like we could help them. They had what I call like the dangerous duo, which is their team was feeling overworked and burned out, and they were missing revenue targets, right? Like those are conflicting things to hear within a business. And if you hear those, it's generally a really good sign that something operationally is amiss, right? If operationally you're sound and everybody's burnt out, like it's not great for the people, but you should be at least making a lot of money because you're billing a lot. So if both of those are happening, like that's not really good for anybody. It's usually a good cue to like, okay, let's dig in. So then we were getting ready to meet with the CEO and founder, and Monica had let me know. She was like, hey, Bret, I'm a big fan of Parallax, and I think it could be a great fit, but he's going to be tough. He's not going to want to spend any money. And I was like, okay, I've heard that before. Let's see if we can get him to see the light. So we met with him, and the conversation started out. It was clear he had his guard up. And Monica and I laid out what we were suggesting and how we could help him improve the business. And a big piece of that was like, they didn't track time. So like starting to track time and then just get a baseline for things like utilization and margins. And the CEO comes out and he's like, hey, we are staunchly against tracking time for the team. I don't want my team to feel like I'm Big Brother looking over their shoulder. Micromanaging what they're doing.
I've heard that one many times before.
Yeah. And I think this is one of the probably 20 to 50 times I've heard it in my career. And then I was like, okay, so like you do mostly retainer business. So like, how do you know how many retainers your team can take on? And the CEO says, Brett, I've been doing this for a long
Yeah,
time.
yeah. Anecdotally, I can tell you.
Yeah, and I've got experience, so I've
Hmm.
got a good gut feel of how much my project team can take on. And then, I think I was like, all right, so then I said back to the CEO, I was like, I'm hearing that your team, they're experiencing burnout. It sounds like they're feeling like they're spending too much time on these different projects, and maybe they can't take on as many as you think. And he says, we have a couple of really tough customers that generally require, like they've been our customers for a while and they know how to squeeze the most out of us, so to speak. And so, like, those people are probably stuck on a few of those customers. And I asked them, and I was like, all right, have you thought about maybe renegotiating terms with that customer or stepping away from those agreements? And he said, Brett, like, we can't take that risk because I don't know if I can make payroll if we discontinue those
Yep.
engagements. And so I think
Yep.
this was like to me like the perfect example of an organization that was stuck in this spiral is they couldn't figure out where the efficiencies were and make those adjustments to the business. And as a result, they were at 30 people then. This was 3 years ago, and I checked recently, and they're still at about 30 people. And their people were feeling a little burnt. They were feeling burnt out. And so it was like it was limiting the positive impacts that founder could provide to his people. They also do a ton, they do a ton of economic work within their local community. And I'm
Hmm.
also thinking if you could break out of this cycle, that's an even bigger impact that you could have in your community
For
too.
sure.
And I guess that, and I know, Kurt, you've worked with a lot of these types of organizations.
Yeah.
Like, how do leaders of services organizations get caught in this cycle?
Yeah, I think part of it is that setting good expectations with your clients. When you're newer to building your agency, you take the lead of what your clients' expectations are and requirements and things are. And over time, you find out that maybe that's not a great fit for how you want to build your business, but you might be stuck with those legacy clients. I've been saying for years, there's no such thing as bad clients. There's just clients you don't charge enough. And if that's the case, if you feel that you aren't charging enough for some of those clients, you've got to spend the time getting out of those situations because, as I mentioned, it's a trickle down effect. If the team gets burned out, maybe they don't do such great work, and then maybe that client leaves anyways. So if you're not really managing it and you're just basing it off of anecdotal data, because I've worked with many leaders that have run their entire businesses based off of how they feel about things. And that's great. That's great for a lifestyle business. If you want a lifestyle type agency where it's just you and a couple of buddies making some stuff because you don't want to get a job, great. That's fine. But if you want to build a real business, something that you can exit, something you can sell, or something that will get merged with other organizations, if you're trying to build something that is going to provide for not only your team members, but for their families, then you've got to take it seriously and start tracking the data in the right way. Otherwise, you're going to be having that higher turnover and you're going to be in this death spiral really quickly.
Yeah. And two, I think something else that you mentioned, which I think is a funny little anecdote, is there's not bad customers. There's just customers we aren't charging enough for,
Yep.
which I think was the case of this was referencing.
Absolutely.
But I have to imagine if you take data to that conversation with the customer to tell them why you don't feel you're charging them enough
Mhm.
and why you need to increase your rates, they'll be more receptive towards that
Yeah,
recommendation.
yeah, yeah. Maybe you can get away with it, your team and saying, I feel like we should go this way, but your clients aren't going to listen to that. They're going to be like, great, I'm glad you feel that way. Anyways,
Yeah.
maybe
And,
we
and
should
I
take this to RFP. And then you're like, whoa, whoa, you don't have to get crazy.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
So,
And it's interesting because I keep, this definitely wasn't like one of the bigger deals I've worked in my career, but it's one that I like in my brain, I keep coming back to just because I think back and I'm like, who was this good for? Like you had a CEO and a founder with the most positive intentions,
yeah.
was trying to do what he felt was right by his team, but somehow got caught in these unhealthy tendencies that were really creating a situation that wasn't great for him and his
Hmm.
leadership because they clearly weren't making a lot of money. The people were burnt out. So if you're
Yeah.
looking at like who's the scenario good for, maybe your customers because you're delivering way more work
Yeah.
than they're paying you for, but nobody else is really benefiting in that scenario.
Yep. 100%. Yeah. It's a cycle. That's why you've got to have the right data. and be tracking it. And a lot of people, as I'm sure that you run into, they're using spreadsheets or doing something to hobble together this information. And that's great when you're getting up and running, getting started. But at some point, you want this to be more automated. You need dashboards to make quick decisions, and whatever you can do to get out of that cycle. That's where the right tooling and the right processes will help, because part of this issue is good communication. And that's where I see a lot of things falling down, because they don't have good communication. And what does it take to have good communication, Bret? You've got to have accurate data to start the conversation. So
it's so interesting, because you're like, what does it take to have good communication? And I think this is another agency I worked with, and they're actually one of our success stories. So this one does have a happy ending, but we worked with two champions, and they were the nicest people, like the nicest people. Like even when they were negotiating price with us, like they were so nice, which is tough to do. Mm-hmm. And they confessed to us, they're like, Bret, we don't have the data, and when we're having hiring conversations, it's a battle. And like these two people that are so nice and we're so amenable are like, sometimes we argue and we're like yelling at each other because we each have projects that need staff on them. And if we don't get that staff, we're letting down our project team and our client.
Everybody, yep.
And so it was like, to your point, it was in the absence of data, it was creating this like really unhealthy communication pattern.
Oh yeah, I've been in that situation before, and that would happen in my agency. We had 3 partners, and we would sit there early in the early days and just argue about which client was more important, which client was more strategic, which client brought in more money. And those were the ones that got to the front of the line. And we didn't at the time have the data to be able to have a real conversation about it.
Yeah. And all 3 of you were probably super well intentioned, right? Like you're trying to do
absolutely, yeah. But we were also business owners that were very boisterous, and we had very strong opinions, and we weren't going to back down very easily. So sometimes we just went around and around. It was a big waste of time. If we had the accurate data instead of anecdotal data, we made better decisions, and I feel that's one reason why we were able to double in size every year, is because we made data a central point of all of our decision making and discussions. So,
all right, and then the last of the people impacts, I think maybe one thing to call out that you mentioned, which is important, is I think for most organizations, they generally want to grow. I don't know if that's been the sentiment that you've seen as well, Kurt, but maybe there are some that have just established, to your point, a mom and pop shop in which it's a small group that's really passionate about the space they're working in, and that's what they want to do. And I would say, like, that's great, right? I think it's just important for businesses that take that approach. Like, make sure your employees have that same expectation, right? There's probably not going to be a ton of opportunity for promotion. There's probably not going to be a ton of opportunity for growing your role and managing people, right? Because we're going to stay at a pretty consistent size, and we're all passionate about the work, and we're comfortable staying in that lane.
Yep. It's very common. I'd love if participants who are watching this, if you're interested in growing your company, put a 1 in the chat. If you're good with keeping it at the size it's at and just want happier clients and more profit, then put a 2 in the chat. I'd love to see what the consensus is of the people that are watching this. There we go. Lots of people that want to grow. Oh yeah, 1 and 2. That's great. So for me, the idea of growth is, you can't just look at it as like you're saying, Bret, like just more customers and more clients. You need better talent. You need to grow the people that you have. You need to provide them with opportunities, and because that's why this is a circle and not a timeline, right?
Exactly. All right, so this has been pretty depressing, hanging out in the death spiral. I think I'm ready to move on. How about you, Kurt?
Yeah, let's go.
All right, cool. That was rough. All right, so now we're in the services growth flywheel. This is much nicer. What planet does this remind you of?
Are you asking me? What planet? I don't know. Neptune? It's blue.
Okay, we were going for Earth.
No, it's not. It's not dark blue. I get more of Neptune feel for this. Let's ask the chat: is this a Neptune color or Earth color? Maybe it's my screen. Maybe it's my screen.
We need more data to settle this argument.
They see, I see what you did there, and I love it. I love it.
All right.
Yeah,
Oh
see,
no.
Rose, thank you. I love
No.
you, Rose. I love you. Oh,
There we
Amanda,
go.
come on,
Thank you,
come on.
Amanda. Appreciate it.
All right.
All right.
Anyways,
All right. Anyway, on board to the conversation here.
it must be my screen. I don't know.
All right. So let's jump in. I think what are like the business symptoms that we typically see with organizations that are on this growth flywheel? And I think we've talked about the importance of growth. And from my perspective, it starts there, right? I think when you look at the organizations, the services agencies that are able to be successful over a long period of time, right? They have this constant influx of, let's call it, more junior talent. That constant influx of more junior talent allows their talent to continue to take on more responsibility.
Yep.
It allows them to keep their prices relatively low compared to the competition, right? Which creates strong margins. Because their prices are lower, they're able to sell more work, which then feeds healthier utilization, feeds revenue growth. Then they're able to hire more, and so on and so forth.
Yep,
I guess
100%. It's because again, to your point, what we said earlier, you want to provide those growth opportunities for your team because you want to keep them. It's a very expensive. I'm sure, as a lot of people who are in this webinar understand, very expensive to replace a person, but a lot of times we're replacing people because we're not able to provide that growth that they're looking for. And that's a bummer. And again, sometimes it's just going to happen. There's just no way you could provide the kind of growth that they're going to get in this new opportunity. But other times, if you can show them a path on where you're going, where that forecast is, and where they could end up themselves, because a lot of agency owners will talk about the agency, right? And good leaders will have those one-on-ones and say, okay, so we talked about where the company's going in the all stack, but I want to talk to you specifically about what that means for you in your role. And that's a great way to keep that head count growing. Back to the communication standpoint, it's a really important part of being a leader.
And just to piggyback off that, like I knew nothing about like services operations at this point in my career, but I think I mentioned I started at a Salesforce consultancy, and we were building custom Salesforce solutions for different customers. And this was like my very first gig out of school, and I really lucked into it. And I think looking back, one of the reasons I lucked into it is because they were growing at such a fast
Yeah.
space. And it opened up all sorts of opportunities for me. Like when I look back, I got okay grades in school, and I still type like a T-Rex. Like I probably wasn't the smartest person that they brought in at the company, but in the 5 years I was there, I was promoted a couple times, and I was given all sorts of leadership. I was given all sorts of leadership opportunities, right? Because as they continued to bring in more junior talent, they needed people like me to step into leadership roles to run
Yep.
projects and run technical teams. I also got paid more over
Yep.
the time that I was there, which was nice. And as much as I like to look back and I rock. Like how'd I do that out of school? Like I think a lot of it was just being in the right organization where not only did I want to grow and grow my responsibility, my skill set, but they also needed me to grow and to continue to take on more responsibility in order to hit their goals and their aspirations as a larger organization.
Yeah, for sure. And that's the thing when you're working in an agency, every single participant here that's joined us, these are high functioning problem solver people. You can't run an agency or operate an agency unless you are the king or queen of firefighting. You can jump in, you can solve problems, you can make decisions and move on. That's why you're doing what you're doing. And to be able to provide those, to use that weapon for good, again, back to the data point, like if you're making good decisions, you're going to constantly come out on top.
All right. Employee retention growth mindset. Kurt, anything like thinking about your experience? I think
Yeah.
you touched on this a little bit. Like maybe what would you like to add?
Yeah, I would say there's been times at agencies I've before where specifically I want to touch on the growth mindset part. Is that because you've got to continue to grow as a leader and a business person because you're leading the way for the team. So for all the people that put one in the chat or even the 1.5s, but even the twos, for let's just be honest, you've got to be personal growing as well and spending time on that personal growth. So whether you're part of a leadership group cohort, or you're reading books, or you're watching videos, or you're reading books, or doing things to help grow yourself as a leader, as a business owner first, and bring that stuff to the table. And then you're also, again, back to that point I mentioned earlier about how important it is that you send cues to people, right? Because if you show up and you're like, yeah, I spent the weekend binge watching Lord of the Rings or something, versus I finished this book on Dare to Lead by Brene Brown or whatever. And you're bringing that stuff, you're sending these cues to folks on what kind of environment they're in, what kind of leadership they have, what kind of priorities are happening. And that stuff is so infectious with the group and the people that are around you, because again, you have to lead by example. And if you're not leading by example and you feel like your team is struggling, the first thing I do in the morning is I look in the mirror, Brett. What could I be doing better? And I know a lot of the people that are in this are highly optimistic, problem-solving people. And I'm sure you look in the mirror all the time and wonder, what could I be doing better? And that's great, because once you're doing that and you have that mindset, your team is going to be much happier. Because I've worked with leaders who do not want to look in the mirror. All the mirrors are covered with, they're covered with curtains. They don't want to look in the mirror because they want to just focus on what other people should be doing and how other people should be operating, and not leading themselves first. And that goes back to something you were saying earlier about that having that good mindset, and how that mindset will open you to new ideas and new ways of thinking. And if you're not there, you're going to about face right into the death spiral. So sorry, long rant, but I'm very passionate about your personal growth as a business owner. It's the most important thing.
All right. Anything especially worth mentioning maybe that we haven't touched on here, Kurt? I know that you had some thoughts around like what you can expect. I think there's the excellent delivery here, which I think is the first time that we're really touching on like how this impacts your clients if you are running one of these business really efficiently. What did you see? What did you
Back
see?
to being a circle of life, right? If you're doing excellent work and you don't have pissed off clients and they're very happy, you're building up referrals and testimonials. Those people are referring to you to other places. Some of my biggest projects came from when and maybe other people, if this has happened to you, put a 1 in the chat, which is you've had somebody leave from a client you're at and move to a new business and brought you along with you. And that's happened to you. It's happened to me a bunch of times. And that feels so good because you did good work and now you've got this partner, right? And the more you can be doing that and delivering that great work, the more partnerships like that you're going to be building. And it's so great for building the business. The team is comfortable with that person. They know what their expectations are. It's a great foundational way to keep growing your business. And so the more that you can capture of those individuals, the better. But you got to do the good work in the first place, which means you've got to have a great team, right? And you got to have a business that's viable and is making money so you can pay attention to those things and not, the sky falling.
And I think that point that you just made is a perfect way to cap off this conversation around why it's a flywheel. And it's because all these different dimensions are working together. And when one of them gains momentum, you start to see the positive impacts with the others. Like in that example, like you're doing excellent delivery, but that's helping you grow revenue, right? So then you're moving back into the middle of the flywheel where you're able to grow revenue, grow utilization, increase headcount. And then you're also able to retain all your best people, which are also in turn contributing to you doing this awesome delivery.
100%.
And then giving you more customers and so on and so forth. So I think we've touched on a lot of these elements together at different points, right? Covered some of the same topics a few times, and it's because they're all so interwoven together.
Yeah, in the moral of the story for me is that you can't see it, but underneath this flywheel is also some dangers because growth and money can cover up a lot of problems, especially in an agency. And so you might be seeing the flywheel from your standpoint is doing really well, but maybe it's really weighted on one side and you'll see it'll start tipping. And as that growth continues, and then if you hit a snag where that growth maybe stalls out a bit, or the margins start to dip because maybe because of the fast growth, you brought on a more overhead to be able to cover these things. I have no idea what I'm talking about. I've never done anything that dumb before. I just want to make sure I'm very clear. I absolutely have. But then you slip right back in because you're not paying attention to how all those things interconnect, because one side is just so shiny and bright and so amazing that it can make you not want to pay attention to those other areas. But it will come back. It will bite you. Oh.
It's like going back to your like mirror analogy. It's like you're looking in the mirror, but you're just looking at your beautiful
Right.
broad shoulder. You're not looking
Right.
at the rest.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. While there's maybe you've got a bloody nose and you're like, what? No, don't pay no attention to that.
Yeah, or you just ate like a bunch of chia pudding and now you have chia seeds in your teeth or something.
Ooh, now I'm hungry.
That happened to me last week at our company. No big deal. All right, cool. I think now that we've covered both of these, the natural question is, okay, if I'm on this growth flywheel, or maybe if I'm seeing some symptoms that I could be on this death spiral, like how do I get my business to a healthier place? And I know what everybody's thinking because we've heard it, which is sell more sales, more revenue, because that will solve all the problems.
Hey, you can solve a bunch of problems in the short term. Absolutely.
Yeah, but I think what you're realizing, and I think this is an analogy that's used for my type of business a lot, is this bucket. And in my type of business, it's like customer, and I see some existing customers on here, which is really fun to see. But retention's so important, right? And they say a company that has great sales but doesn't have great retention is essentially a leaky bucket. And the more you pour into it, you're not necessarily able to grow, and the water level isn't rising because the water's leaking out.
Yeah.
And I think it's the same thing with an agency that doesn't have strong operations.
It feels so good to throw water in that bucket, Brett, though. I just want to keep throwing water in the bucket. It's great.
I know it does feel good, but then it probably doesn't feel good to see that water level keep falling.
The big puddle of water on the floor.
The huge puddle of water, and like you think you're gaining momentum and you think that things are turning a corner, but money and opportunity is continuing to leak out of these holes. So then the question is, like, how do I know where these holes are, right? And how do I start to plug them? And I think that's where strong operations come into play, right? So we're not saying don't go get more revenue. Like, you definitely need to keep pouring revenue into this bucket. But if you want to grow in a healthy way, you also need to start identifying where these holes are and how you can plug them. And this comes back to a very famous adage. And like, I learned this in school, and I didn't realize this was you, Kurt, but you can't manage what you can't measure. That's genius.
This is something my father taught me. And honestly, I was lucky growing up when I first started my first business. My father was an entrepreneur and had started his business way back in the 50s. And he was a big fan of really being able to understand what's coming in and what's going out. Now, much like me, and probably like a lot of folks here, we're not accountant type people. I am not a great math person. Even for my consulting business, my wife is my CFO. I'm not that person. And in all of my businesses, when I didn't understand things, I brought in people that would help me understand those things. But I didn't need to know how the accounting worked, but if I couldn't measure it, I couldn't manage it. I couldn't run it. So it was really important.
And I think and then the next question is, right, what can you measure? And I think there's a lot of noise, and I think it can be tough to figure out what metrics are most important. And there's so many different metrics that you can measure. And what we're trying to do here is just boil this down to 2 core metrics. And what we've seen with our customers, and and I know Kurt's seen, is that if you just focus on these 2 things, it's going to provide so much visibility into what's really going on in the business. And so the first one is billable utilization, which is what we call like a people efficiency metric. And so this is going to tell you out of all the people you have on staff, how much of their time they're spending on billable revenue generating work
Yep.
versus sitting on the bench or maybe even on non-billable work, right? And then the second metric here is going to be project margin. And this is what we'd call like a project efficiency metric. And so this is telling you like, okay, now that we've done step one, which is staff the people on the project, how do I know that we're making money? And how do I know that it's a worthwhile project for my business to take on? And then it's continuing to push us in the right direction.
One of the clients I'm coaching right now came to me because they were very interested in maybe niching down or maybe getting more specialized and targeting a few industries. And the first exercise we did is which projects over the last 5 years have brought you the most money? Which ones have been the most successful? Then which ones have you enjoyed the most working on? And then we made a Venn diagram here of these things, and we thought, okay, let's start with those as target areas. So again, back to the point about not just knowing how much money I can take home and telling the team like, you got to get your timesheets done so I can make money, but having them understand like this goes into the broader vision of the organization and how that works. That's why these metrics are so key. They're not just for the end of the month and can I pay my bills. They're about where is the agency going to be in 5 years from now.
Totally. And I think when we think about, I think utilization, it's one of those metrics that has a bad rap. I think when we talked about that example earlier where CEO is like, I don't want to micromanage my people. I think there's this perception, and it's a good perception.
Can I just bring up real quick? I'm sorry. I have a real problem with the word micromanage because micromanagement does not mean leaning over people's shoulder. What micromanagement is inconsistent management, where you show up meeting yelling and screaming, why isn't everybody doing what they should be doing? Everybody get back to work. And then you take off and you don't show up for 2 more weeks. And then you come in and you're like, hey, everything's cool. Everybody want ice cream, whatever. What people end up doing is they're so scared of being micromanagers is that they swing the pendulum so far the other way where they don't do any management. And then what they do is seagull, thank you. Yes, I used to call it the swoop and poop, right? That's the seagull management. You come in and you're like, yeah, blah, blah, blah. And then you take off and papers are flying as you're out the door. And this is very common, but you might be doing it even though you don't think you're doing it. But you're doing it because again, if you are avoiding actually managing people, just managing people does not equal micromanagement. So I have very strong opinions about that. Sorry, I had to interject that.
Yeah. And I think it's a great point because you're probably, I think also responsibility as a manager is to provide your team with opportunities and to some extent help them navigate tough client situations and protect their time. And so I think when you start measuring utilization, if you haven't done it in the past, most organizations, the first time they're like, oh my gosh, they're like, we knew that some people were going to be low, but we didn't realize how high some of these other people were, right? Yep. And both of those are like not great situations. And so the idea isn't that you want everybody across the board to spend more time at work and less time with their family, right? It's like you want to balance out utilization across the business to a reasonable expectation. And then another big part of it too is probably going to be transitioning to spending more time on billable work and less time on non-billable work that's consuming your team, but isn't necessarily benefiting the business.
Yep.
And so I think we can actually we'll start with utilization, and I think you can talk to margin, but similar to what Kurt had mentioned, like when we're talking with organizations for the first time, just measure utilization. If you can, do it out into the future, do it 10 to 12 weeks into the future, and then see what your data tells you. And then if you can, that'll give you a sense of if I have too much work or not enough work, which by itself is really useful to understand. And then you can also see some of those imbalances that you were talking about, Kurt, where if you dimension this by department or by role, you might see that like we're selling way too much engineering work, but we're not selling enough design work, right?
Right.
And so we don't necessarily need to push more work for engineering. We need to push more work for design. So there's all these different levers that we can pull in the business, but which levers we pull is going to be dependent on what the data is telling us.
Yeah, or what we found, I remember a key moment in Foundry's growth was we found why has development got higher margin than design does? But seems like we're doing as much design as development, and then being able to dive in and start pulling levers to fix that anomaly. We had no idea until it was too late. I should say, not until it was too late, but when it started to pop up, we saw the trend pretty quickly and were able to address it. So,
and you may not have without the data, or even if you knew
yeah,
from a gut feel perspective, it's tough to have that conversation internally and make
no,
decisive.
it is not just
Yeah.
with your partners, but with the leaders, right? Because if
Yeah.
some of the folks here have a sizable agency, and maybe you've got a design leader, a development lead, and you're having to get them to help rally the troop around stuff. If you're not giving them the right information and you're just like, I feel the team isn't working as hard as they could be, that's not helpful. That's
No.
not helping anybody.
No. And then on the flip side, and I think you started to talk about your methodology, which is right in line with ours, which is then look at your margins, and say, if you start with projects probably, and then if you can, either in spreadsheets or with whatever other tools you have available, look at it by client, right? Like,
Yes.
just like that CEO, you probably have a gut that some clients aren't profitable or as profitable as other clients are for you, but it's tough to make that case internally to say goodbye to revenue unless you have the data to back that up.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Because some clients are great for cash flow, but bad for revenue. So
Yeah.
you've got to balance that, and you've got to plan for how to dig yourself, even if it's just a small amount. You got to dig your way out of that.
And I think those are the tough clients too, because they're disguised as a really good client because they have such
Absolutely.
a
Yeah.
high revenue number, but they're consuming an unbalanced level
Yep.
of resources from your business that are sucking out the energy from.
Exactly. Yep.
So I think, and then another way you can, which would be interesting to look at, is like by offering. So if you can measure the profitability of your different offerings, you can also figure out like which offerings you should be selling more of and which ones maybe selling a little bit less of.
Yeah. Or just completely removing. I've coached people to be like, you've got to get rid of this service completely. I know it's really tough to do, but we should look at what services we should be adding because of what people are looking for in 2025 versus what they were looking for in 2003 when you started.
Exactly. Yep. So yeah, so I think thank you all for those that have been hanging out from the beginning. I think Kurt and I have enjoyed nerding out on this stuff. We see one question in the chat that we can cover. If others have questions, I think Kurt and I both have some time to hang out and answer those.
Yeah. Yeah. What's the question?
All right, Kurt, here we go. So my agency has a highly skilled small team of mostly senior level employees. They all care very much about their work and want to deliver high quality product, but sales are stagnating because we've become so expensive. Yeah. The team gaffes when we suggest reining in the scope because they see it as compromising our quality. How do we break free?
Oh, yeah. That's a good one.
It's a good one. Yeah.
It's a good one. If you got to jump in, Brett, but I definitely have some.
Yeah, you take it first.
So, yes, you've got a more senior team. You're selling a higher end product. And so you've got to sell it as a higher end service, and you've got to brand it as a higher end service. You've got to go to market as a higher end service because that's the differentiator, right? Because no, I'm not going to hire a team from Costa Rica because what I need the A team, not the cheapest team. You've got to own that and you got to go to market like that. And so there is a difference between reining in scope versus being professionals and building out phases to projects and being able to release things in more of a product process where we're releasing bits and pieces at a time. I look at Apple, one of the biggest companies in the world with their Apple Intelligence. They're like, we'll release the hardware first, and then we'll release a little bit of an Apple Intelligence, and then we'll release a little bit more. And they're doing this very purposefully because they know what would happen with something they put together. They put together quickly, comparatively to some of their other products, and they're being very careful about how they're releasing it. So a senior team should be able to come in and demand a little bit more respect from the clients and be able to produce work in a way that proves that their lead should be followed. For me, I probably want to know more context about around the reining in scope. But to me, it's more about how do we create plans that work best for the client. Also, make the team feel like they are empowered to deliver the quality that they really want to deliver. So,
I think this is where the data also comes in handy too. Like it sounds like there are at least a couple pieces of the business that just aren't profitable, right? If it's maybe taking more money or taking more time than it should. So being able to see what services are profitable, which services aren't, is it just certain departments that are less
right.
profitable than others? And
Yep.
once you have that data, then you can start to think about different adjustments you could make. Something else you could explore, right, is that concept of continuing to supplement with more junior talent. So maybe talking to those team members and saying, okay, we have this out of our 100% of work, 40 to 30% of it takes this really highly skilled skill set to execute. But then we have this other 50 to 60% of the work that is administrative for these team members, but could be a growth opportunity for more junior, lower cost team members.
Yep.
So maybe seeing how you can supplement those highly skilled team members with more junior team members as well.
Yeah, that's a really good point about how do you develop that over time, because what up and coming developer wouldn't love to work on a team with other senior people? Yes, it'd be more intimidating, but it's a really great opportunity for that person to get a lot of great experience right away. And the other thing I'll say too is that your work is not too expensive. The things is the market you're going after is not paying for that premium price. You need to find a market that is paying premium price for those people, and you've got to position yourself in that way. So there's nobody in this room that's too expensive. The things is you're just selling to the wrong people. Custom software availability growing.
All right, another question, and just as a heads up for the people that do have to jump at the top of the hour.
Yeah, you can connect with all of us there.
Yep. And I think, yeah, feel free to jump. I think, Kurt, can you hang on for a couple more minutes? Just
sure. Yeah, I don't have a hard stop. I love this question. We're missing a data point for value delivery. What's your thoughts on that, Bret?
This is one I don't have a great answer for, and I think it's a really good question. Yeah.
So for me, it starts with the most simplest. What do your clients equate as value? And so you could start really simple with just an NPS score, right? Would they refer you? Would they not refer you? That's the simplest way to say, did we deliver value or not deliver value? What you want to do is figure out how they are judging value. Now, so you're doing custom software development. So I'm guessing that you're probably producing more products that have users that are using it. The value might come from users enjoying using the system. And you could be pulling data from the system to say, look at how many people, right? Like they do this in the video game industry, where they're like, look at how many active users there are at any given time. And that tells you how popular a video game is. So you can do the same thing with a SaaS product and say how many people are using it on a regular basis and how many tickets or help desk things are we getting, and being able to pull that data together to say, look at over time, the need for help desk or IT support or those things have gone down while the amount of usage has gone up. You can pull together those value things. Now, if they're looking for specific dollar amounts, then that's something where you've got to partner very closely with your client to understand what's the average budget that they're working with per month, and then how is this tool that you've produced impacting that budget? Is it producing in a positive or negative way? So there's a lot of ways to spin that, but I usually say the easiest way to say, hey, are we valuable, is more customer service type focus, like NPS score or something like that. But if you want to get really nerdy, if you're a custom software development company, I'm guessing you might want to, is that you can get in there and start pulling data from the customer that they give you access to, that will tell you how much utilization is being happening within the tools and things that you're building versus how much money is being spent out there. And then being able to judge that, right? Like how much does an employee cost their salary, and is their utilization is going up because of the tool, they're offsetting that cost of that salary. If they're getting more customers or they're selling more things, how many more things are they selling at what cost now that they're using this tool and how they're using it. So there's lots of ways you can get in there and figure out that stuff. That's a great question.
Yeah.
This is something I struggled with at previous companies. And part of it was because we weren't as partnered with the client on their data as much as we were on their repos. Like we needed to have access to that data in order to see what stuff was going. But as people who were just building stuff for them, we usually didn't ask for that type of stuff. And that's when I realized, oh, we're just a vendor. We're not really a partner. And if we think we're partners, we have to have access to business data, not just the repo.
I think those are great points. I would say that the one something I would sprinkle on top of that too is to separate these metrics, right? I think, and
For sure.
when you look at margin and utilization, those are both like economic metrics, right? It's like, how is this team member contributing to the economic performance of the business, which is really important. And those things should definitely be measured and part of somebody's performance evaluation. But then to Kurt's point and to your question, Catherine, like, what's the quality of their delivery? And I think that's probably more nuanced, and that should be measured and managed and evaluated, but it's a little bit of a different thing.
Yeah, it is. Yep. It is. And again, it really depends on the type of software you're developing and the type of industry you're in. If it's a very highly regulated industry, it's going to be harder to get some of that data. If you're in healthcare or insurance, things like maybe even financial services, but there's ways to get it and pull that data out.
All right. So I think we're at a little bit over time. Kurt, I know there's one more question for you in the chat.
Yeah, the book recommendation. I have so many book recommendations. We'll go way over. But if you wanna connect with me, if you want to find me, you can find me on LinkedIn. Shoot me a quick DM. I'll send you over half a dozen books that you could read on different things. But I'll tell you, one of the things that I usually suggest is The Go Giver is a great way, because it's a great book for how to have the mindset of a service person in terms of either networking, but working internally with your team, networking with potential clients, because that's what we're doing as agency owners. We're building relationships. So I would tell you some of the top books that I would tell you about is building relationships tools. My dad gave me How to Win Friends and Influence People when I was 15 years old, and still to this day I gave it to my boys. It's 70 years old and it's still more relevant than it's ever been today. So those things, plus, like I said, like a book like The Go Giver, probably the top first recommendation in terms of the calm and healthy part. Profitability, let's talk about that. So
all right. Again, I think Kurt and I have both had fun. Thank you everybody for joining.
Yes, thank you for participating, everybody. It's so cool.
Yep. And please reach out if you want to continue the conversation. Thank you.
Cool. Thanks, everyone.